So let me jump into the paper. Thank you again for organizing, and it's been very interesting this morning presentations. Framed by the psychedelic renaissance, I explore how Amazonian psychedelic aesthetic, grounded in plant ontology and visual art, offer a decolonial framework for challenging dominant extractive epistemologies. Focusing on the collaboration between Peruvian visionary art Pablo Amaringo and Colombian anthropology Eduardo Luna, I examine how visionary art combines culturally embedded and ecological entangled knowledge. I investigate the ethical and environmental implications of visionary imagery as sites of transmission and translation. The analysis offers an ecostatic reading of Amaringo's artwork as both cosmological records and political interventions. This offers an account to a contrast account to Western colonial scientific and recreational approaches to psychedelics. Their story is a reminder to contemporary researchers and artists to proceed with humility and relational accountability to avoid the path of extractivism and appropriation. So Pablo Amaringo, in the 1991 published book with Eduardo Luna, offers a cautionary tale of this early experience with ayahuasca. One day, I was visiting an old man in a little settlement called San Antonio, about a day's journey by boat from here. The old man asked me, "Have you taken ayahuasca before?" I lied to him. "No, this is the first time." The old man responded, "Listen, young man, what are you doing with me? You have taken ayahuasca before, and your lie could have killed me. What happened is that I did not take all this seriously. I continued taking ayahuasca like many people do, but I was not a healer." End quote. This remark becomes a turning point in Pablo Amaringo's life, not only as a healer, but as an artist. The same intention helps us acknowledge that ayahuasca is not merely a chemical compound or an hallucinogenic tool. It is an animate teacher, a relational force, and a portal to other ontologies. Engaging with ayahuasca as a visionary art and an aesthetic practice demand ethical orientation, cultural awareness, and a deep sense of relational accountability. Today, I explore how psychedelics as an aesthetic can challenge colonial assumptions. The work is guided by the work of Pablo Amaringo, an anthropologist insight of Eduardo Luna, as well as the recent scholarship of Laura Delf and Ana Fernandez Texidor. I examine the ways psychedelic experience may act as a site of epistemic disobedience. I go beyond a universalizing framework and situate this practice within a specific cultural and ecological context, advocating for attentiveness and accountability in engaging with plants and the aesthetic forms they inspire. So relational aesthetic and epistemic vulnerability towards the decolonial psychedelic ethics. Pablo Amaringo vision experience with ayahuasca emerged from a cosmology grounded in healing and communication with humans and with more than human personas. His paintings are not individual expressions of altered consciousness, but teachings transmitted through interspecies communications, embedded in ancestral and ecological relationality. In contrast, the psychedelic turn in the United States, particularly in the 60s and 70s, as R.K. Green writes in The Return to Nature and the Problem of the Perennial, I quote, "The utopic space allowed plenty of inspiration as a space of associative transfer. This is why many people feel more creative on psychedelic drugs. The process itself breaks down the ability for symbolic to act as a symbol," end quote. Green critique points to how psychedelic effect can flatten the cultural and ontological complexity of the experience, reducing this phenomena to a notion that all spiritual truths are essentially the same and universally accessible. This perspective obscures the specificity and relationality embedded in the wide diversity of Amazonian psychedelic practices. In Amazonian cosmology, vision is not just a perceptual or creative act, it is an ethical one. shaped through relation with plant spirits, ancestral guidance, and careful apprenticeship. As Laura Del explains, decolonial approaches to psychedelic requires an epistemic vulnerability. I quote, a willingness to unlearn assumptions about knowledge and how to attend to knowledge is generated through relational, ecological, and spiritual entanglements, end quote. This kind of vulnerability is not only intellectual, it's ethical and ontological. It demands accountability to the communities and the cosmologies that have long safeguarded these practices, not as a passive source of data or raw experience, but as a sovereign knowledge system. Eduardo Luna's ethnographic work on vegetalismo, a syncretic form of mestizo Amazonian shamanism, articulates this notion clearly. For Luna, ayahuasca is not simply an hallucinogenic, but a pedagogical agent, a teacher whose visions are lessons that must be studied and lived. Under Luna's encouragement, Amaringo began painting his ayahuasca visions many years after he had stopped his vegetalist practice. His paintings are not illustrations, they are cosmopolitical expressions. And I quote from Luna, the paintings depict, and it's something like you can see in the slide now. The paintings depict serpents, celestial beings, ayahuasqueros in healing rituals, and interdimensional spirits, alongside with modern elements such as airplane pagodas and hospitals, end quote. This aesthetic hybridity is porous, resisting purity in favor for a living, mutable syncretism. Such representations unsettle Western distinctions between art, knowledge, and ritual. Luna and Amaringo work invite us to perceive visionary art not as a personal expression, but as a relational practice. They offer a vision of epistemology where the self, the more than human, and the cosmos are co-constitutive. This epistemic orientation challenged methodologies and challenge scientific methodologies and spiritual extractivism. Ana Fernandez Tercidor warned us that the current interest in ayahuasca reproduces colonial logic, treating Amazonian knowledges as data to be extracted and subject to a sterile, decontextualized experimentation. Without a decolonial framework, this resurgence risks reenacting the same spiritual and intellectual appropriations that have long defined Western engagements with the Global South. Amaringo and Luna collaboration shows the complicit dynamic of sharing Amazonian knowledge as a global epistemic model, which must be done under a coetic framework, not as a matter of fact, but as a constitutive experience itself. One possible approach is to acknowledge the plants themselves as sentient, relational beings that engage to the protocols of reciprocity. Amaringo aesthetics becomes a site of ethical and ontological transformation. His aesthetic is not simply a perception of colors, patterns, or visions. It is a mode of relation, a means of learning to see, to feel, and to know otherwise. In this context, his creative work invites listening, surrendering, and accountability. It is a mode of perception reorganized not only through visual and auditory alteration, but through ethical and ontological transformation grounded in the relational ecologies of belonging. Reimagining research through the lens of plants. It is almost cliché to say that when you encounter Banisteriosis capi, there is a moment when something shifts. The vine begins to speak, not metaphorically, but with intention and presence. The leaves rustle with meaning. The brews unfold a language of colors and form that you do not invent, but receive. Yet, for most researchers trained in dominant academic methods, such events are rendered as anecdotes, symbols, or hallucinations, never as epistemic encounters. Laura Dels points to this epistemic gap. I quote, most research on ayahuasca does not and perhaps cannot grant the plant any real agency, animacy, or intelligence. And if it does, it is often by proxy, through the voices of a healer, a participant, a cultural intermediary, but never the plant speaking itself, end quote. Delft critique is aimed at an epistemological structure that leads certain forms of knowledge to appear illegitimate and that can be dismissed as superstition or fantasy. This phenomenon is especially noted in biomedical fields as a precautionary credibility. The fear is understandable. Psychedelic research has long been viewed with suspicion and is only now begin to gain some credibility. To speak of plant spirits, plants intelligence, risk ridicule, and can push the farther into the margins once again. So the question, how should we proceed? Of course, I do not have a definite answer, but I believe that art can help us approach through its aesthetic surplus. What Delft leaves the something more, keeping us from falling back into the subject-object duality of scientific method. The problem is not simply of content, but of form, how we say it and how we act. Visionary art invites knowledge as participatory process. In contrast, psychedelic research produces colonial hierarchies by rendering plants as objects of study rather than collaborative agents of knowledge. The vine is boiled down, literally and figurative, into DMT. Such an approach is insufficient for engaging the ontologies that ayahuasca opens up. If we treat ayahuasca not as a substance that alters consciousness or a molecule, but as a relational being capable of co-producing knowledge within socio-ecological contexts, with a radical, that this will bring a radically different epistemic stance to come into play. So from healer to painter, Pablo Amaringo painting, for him, the vegetal world is alive with intention, ethics, and cosmopolitical force. As he told to Eduardo Luna, these works are not produced immediately following an ayahuasca session, but rather drawn from memory. His collection of journeys taking many years prior. Amaringo becomes a witness of his own vision in the act of painting. It is important not to romanticize the collaboration between Luna and Amaringo. Like any visual archive project, their partnerships carry intentions between intention and interpretation, between oral testimony and visual transcription. Luna emphasized that Amaringo painters transmitted teachings received directly from the plants, arguing that the separation between voice and image, sense and meaning, was refused in his work. Yet, in making this teaching legible to the broader audiences, especially including like ethnobotanists, because Luna did a meticulous listing of all the scientific names of every plant that appears in Amaringo's painting. Luna imposes a narrative structure and coherence into the images that resist total translation. We might ask whether existing methodologies are adequate to the task of understanding relationality in its fullest sense. Perhaps it is time to shift towards a plant ontology as a possible approach that resists reductionist methods and support epistemic vulnerability. This vulnerability is not weakness, but a practice, a readiness to be undone by the encounter, to be taught by the divine in the language that defines peer reviews and controlled experimentations. Luna recalls a conversation with Amaringo in which he reflects, I quote, "There comes a time when the body can no longer carry what the spirit knows," end quote. For Amaringo, that moment arrives in the form of illness, both physical and visionary. After years of guiding others through ayahuasca healing, he was pursued by visions that would not let him go. He said that they came night after night during sleeping and waking hours, whispering, demanding. Through he had spent many years helping others face fears and trauma, the spirit now turned their focus towards him. Eventually, a message emerged. It was no longer his path to heal through ceremony. His new mission was to paint what he had seen, to give form to the invisible and speak of the spirit world through image. This was not a retreat from healing, but a transformation of form, where once he worked with chants, now he worked with color, where once he guided journeys through the body of the plant, he now guided journey through memory. As Luna recounts, Amaringo, incapacitated and bedridden, he began to draw, not because he identified himself as an artist, but because the visions would not stop. I quote from Luna, his earliest drawings were rendered as soot from lamp, shoe polish, charcoal, whatever material were at hand. When a friend gave him industrial blue permalatex from a car repair shop, he used that too, end quote. From this necessity emerged an aesthetic practice grounded in a spiritual obligation. His work defines neat classification as either fine or folk art. Rather, it is a translation practice, a survival strategy, and a plant-based spiritual technology. His canvases are not depictions of hallucination, but metonymic maps of both Amazonian rainforests and other worlds. Large interpicious realms where rivers transmit knowledge and spirits teach and heal through image. Amaringo paintings become portals, doorways through which others might glimpse healing as a cosmic order that he came to know. His mission was not to impress or aestheticize psychedelia. It was to warn, to guide, and to preserve. Aware of the growing threat of extractivism, forgetting an ecological collapse, he founded a school of painting in the Peruvian Amazon to continue the work as a visionary transmission. Amaringo's shift from vegetalista to painter showed that the aesthetic experience of psychedelics need not to be confined to the ceremonial moment, but can be extended into forms of cultural transmission rooted in community. He was a messenger, tasked with translating a healing cosmology that challenged anthropocentric frameworks in both science and art. Amaringo paintings do not merely celebrate a mystical jungle. They document a territory under siege. The Amazon is dying. The spirits of the plants with it. And these are not exotic others. They are agents in an ongoing struggle to survival, deforestation, fires in a world torn by all extraction, agricultural extractivism, and spiritual tourism. The work of the visionary artists like Amaringo is a dangerous political art. It risks being misunderstood, commodified, and exoticized by audiences comfortable with the aestheticization of indigenous experiences. This is where decolonial thought becomes crucial. To properly engage Amaringo's work today is to resist the urge to consume it as a visual spectacle. Instead, we must meet it on its own term, as a call to relation and memory for the health of the Amazon forest. Amaringo's works offer a cautionary example, visionary aesthetic, even more from relational work that sustain them risks becoming commodity, stripped of context and reduced to exotic spectacle. The task is not to appropriate the vision, but to honor the vision and to cultivate practice that are not only decolonial in name, but in form, process, and in relation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, do we have questions from the room? Nice. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Thank you. It was a very beautiful presentation. And my question is, if we believe or assume these entities are real, and not just some constructions of our subconscious, how do we discern if they are good in the sense that they contribute to our healing, wholeness, liberation, or they are not some deceptive entities who like to disguise themselves as good? Is there a criteria, do you think, to discern that?
Thank you for the question. Well, first, I'm gonna kind of separate the question in two parts, and the idea of good and bad, I think, is not part of the Amazonian cosmovision, because they're forces that are, yes, they are forces that are kind of perhaps more in the Spinoza sense, that have intensities that either have more power, that increase your power or decrease your power. So I think perhaps it's better to understand their cosmovision under those terms instead of a classification of good or bad. And then the other part is like for the in the Amazonian cosmovision is like saying that just comparing with any other religion, like you can say that for people believe that God is not real. For them, the spirit of the plants is as real as God. So you see what I mean? It's a big gap between the Western understanding and Amazonian understanding. So we cannot say if we doubt of the existence of God. Earlier we talked about agnosticism. Then we can also be agnostics about the plants, but there's, of course, within their cosmovision, the plants are spirits and they are real and alive. So I hope that answered that.
So they don't have a specific understanding of a differentiation between good and bad, and they see these neutral forces that can be used for either purposes, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a lot, within the which they're called vegetalistas. Truly, the term shaman is not an Amazonian term. The better term would be to use Yakcha, which is the Quechua word, or vegetalistas or curanderas. So what they do with them is they become these forces that allows to the process of intensities, perhaps kind of become into sort of distribution of power, and the healing occurs through that.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We still have some questions from the room.
Hi, thank you. That was interesting. Oh, this. So I was listening to the talk, and I tried to push this into some form of a question of semantics and the language. And it's also, you mentioned decolonialism. It's a way in which each language kind of colonized the other language. And if this is the issue, and we come back to a semantics, we can think that one language tried to dominate the other and eliminates the ontology of the language on which the other language, which is colonized, was based on. So if it's a language matter, I'm just curious if it's a matter of inscrutability of the references of the two culture, or it's something way more incompatible in the sense of one ontology will cannot be translated into the other one. It's a matter of semantics, or it's something like way more than that. Because colonialism can be brought into some form of language in which you declassify some of the terms or categories or natural kinds, right? Because it is a natural kind discussion here at the end. Yeah, when you show the formula of the chemistry, I'm thinking about Western alchemy. Western alchemy was reduced and rectified and took out of the story of Western chemistry. And you can do the same thing about fermentation, for example. Van Helmont was talking about this. And then you say, oh, come on, let's not talk about this because it's wrong. Alchemy shouldn't be even mentioned in a class in chemistry. Whereas in this case, I guess it's similar, but yeah, you can say, no, there are two languages, but they cannot be translated versus we need to get rid of one.
No,
Thank
thank you
you.
for the question. It's super interesting, and I almost have two answers for you, and I have an easy kind of I will say like a card under the sleeve, and I just say like, well, art kind of answers these to the aesthetic. But however, I'm going to take a different route, and I want to go back to the idea of semantics and talk about a little bit about the concept that I introduced of the syncretism. So. As Eduardo Luna discussed the practice of some of the Amazonian vegetalismo in terms of a syncretic practice, meaning that it's a mix, you know. It's a mestizo practice. It's a mixture of it's a surviving of some of the Amazonian languages and Amazonian practices, embedded in part also with deep aspects of Catholicism and Spanish. So in a way, it doesn't be I think what sometimes we fail to recognize when we talk about colonialism is that there's a lot of syncretic motion happening, and that is a process. And perhaps in this idea of suggesting how to overcome some colonial models is actually to engage a little more in these syncretic practices that allows for this porosity, for these mixtures, for what is not completely stable. And I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but I feel that that's where I want to move towards when I'm talking about the decolonial models.
It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for your presentation.